I must say, Anthony, it was a wonderful movie, but my God, I look old. Of course, I am, but I hate to face that fact. The other thing is, the best thing about tonight's event is that I don't have to go through this for another 80 years. Now, I am not going to even start to thank the people who have worked on this. I had that in my original notes to thank them one and all, but I'm not going to do that. I'm instead, in the spirit of what I think our movement is about. Tom Barton, where are you? Would you stand up, please? Thomas Barton puts out the GI Special and Military Resistance newsletter. He works all day. He comes home at night. I don't know how he manages to do that, but almost every night he puts out 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 pages of copy, which I get. Don't have time to read them all. I have stopped sending them on to people, but I let people know the resources there. If you think that we have abandoned the men in the Army, in the Navy, and the Air Corps, you're wrong. We know they are trapped by this system. We are at their side, and Tom Barton gets out the material which makes it possible to have a link with those guys and women who are suffering, as they did at Fort Hood, and all of the other men and women who have committed suicide as a result of what they've been through, who are not in the headlines. So, Tom, you are part of what makes the movement work night and day. Now,
you're what inspired me.
You inspired yourself. Take credit for what you're doing. Now, beyond that, I want to say that as someone who has lived all their life as a staff person of the Pacifist movement, that's not quite true. My first job out of college was digging ditches. I learned how to use, I learned how to use a jackhammer, and that was interesting. Shakes you up. I've worked in shipping as a shipping clerk and done other jobs, but my first job, which I really got, was in 1958 at the Liberation magazine as theoretically editorial secretary, which meant, in fact, the gopher for 5 wonderful people, Bayard Rustin, A.J. Musty, Sid Lambs, Roy Kepler, and Dave Dollinger. And I learned something very important, and that is never assume that 5 adult radical men are responsible or can be trusted with manuscripts. One of our people on the West Coast had sent a copy of a fiction magazine, a fiction article, for us to consider. And I had typed up, with the original, I typed up 4 additional carbon copies. Now, most of you are too young to remember carbon copies. And you know that there was a limit as to how many copies you could get. I mean, 5 or 6 is about it. I had a total of 5 copies, and I gave 1 to each of the editors. And about 6 months later, the man on the West Coast wanted to know what had happened with his article. And I inquired of the 5 responsible radical leaders what they had done with the article, and they had lost it. So my job there at Liberation was really to learn how fallible your leadership is and to carry the mailbags down to the post office. I graduated from that to the War Resisters League in 1960 as the field secretary and held that post until I retired in 1999. Now, I am one of the people who's very lucky. It cost me nothing to get arrested. I was not going to be fired. I was not going to be fired for wearing a strange button. I wasn't even going to be fired for writing an article in Win magazine in 1969 about being homosexual. The organization took that in their stride, including the fact that as someone who's somewhat manic depressive, there were days when I didn't get anything really at all done. I'm sure I'm not the only person here who at the end of the day has looked at their desk and wondered what the hell they did. Well, those who worked with me at the WRL, Ed Hedeman is here, and he will know this. Others who worked with me know that there were times when I really didn't get a lot done. And there were other times when I did, and the organization put up with that. Very few people have that luxury. So let me acknowledge first that luxury. It wasn't courage, it was simply luck that I was able to do those things. Now, I think God watches over atheists and cowards because while I felt really listening to the comments tonight, I've rarely heard so much garbage. I've managed to get through 80 years, but I almost never get arrested, and I probably have been arrested a dozen times or so. But I lived my life at the War Resisters League in the company of felons. Ralph de Gia, Jim Peck, Bayard Rustin. These were all men who had served time in federal prison. Not little tinky 5-day terms in the Tombs or 30-day terms at Hart's Island. They had served prison terms, and I never did. On the time we burned the draft cards with Tom, there were 5 of us burning our draft cards, and 4 went to prison for 6 months. And the FBI insisted they couldn't find enough of my draft card to bring an indictment, which wasn't true. I'm a photographer, and I know how telephoto lenses work. I know they had copies of the draft cards. They were afraid that because I had passed 35, they might lose that case and might in the process lose a series of cases.